Long ago, there was a great, terrible drought that completely swept over the land of Shongopovi. And the people's crops were withering up, and they were dying. There were few wild berries to collect, and the roots were so skinny and scanty, they could not survive upon them even. And the abundant flocks and herds of animals were dwindling to almost nothing. And in this land, there was disease that was sweeping over it, and the people were becoming sick. Their illnesses were making them fearful of one another and separating them. There was one particular boy who was frightened, and he no longer would play with the other children. Instead, he would sit on the side and he would just be by himself, absorbed in his fears. And when the children went home, he would wander around the cemetery through the tombstones. And when he was tired of wandering, he would sit on his grandparents' grave with his head down, just absorbed in his world of fear and distortion. And things did not get better when he went home. He hardly ate anything. And when he slept, instead of getting rest, he would be frightened all night with terrible dreams, keep him awake. And oftentimes he would wake up in a feverish sweats, chills. The people and his parents were very worried for his health. But one day this boy came to his father, who was the chief of the land. And he said, "Father, I have a question. May I ask?" His father said, "Yes, please. A very word for you." And then the boy asked a very important question for a boy his age. He said, "Father, where do the dead go?" The father was stunned at this question. He had, in fact, thought about it before himself, but he had no answer to give him. Oh, how he wished he could. He could see the worry in his son's eyes. He could see his fears in his stomach. And he wished that he could comfort his son. But instead, he said, "My son, I do not have an answer to your question, but I will find out. I will go to all the chiefs in the village, and all the chiefs around the land, from village to village. I'm sure one of them will know." And so the father went about. He went from village to village. He went to find who could answer this question. But every chief that he went to could not give any more satisfactory answer than he could give. And all they said was, "Your son is possessed by ghosts, and you need to go talk to Old Man Badger. He's the only one who's wise enough and old enough to know of such matters like this that relate to the dead." And so the father went to Old Man Badger, and he relayed to him the story of his son. And Old Man Badger listened very closely, and when he was finished telling him, Old Man Badger said, "I'm afraid I don't know the answer to his question either. but I do have some medicine that will comfort him, and if the boy listens to it, he will find the answer out for himself." He went to the medicine cabinet and, fumbling around through some bags of herbs, and "Aha," he said, "this one right here." Took it down, and then he said, "Go home tonight and sleep. And in the morning, I want you to dress your son in a white robe and paint his chin black, and then wrap a headband around his head with a feather right on his forehead attached." The father did as he was told. He went home and he went to sleep that night. He could hear his son getting up, turning in horror, which tore his heart apart. But the next morning he did exactly as he was told. He dressed his son in a white robe, and he fastened a feather on his forehead and painted his chin black to prepare him for when the Old Man Badger arrived. And Old Man Badger did arrive that morning, as he said. He had a basket of white sand, and he poured it out onto the floor. And he said for the child to lay down on the sand. And the boy laid down, and then Old Man Badger put some herbs in his mouth and painted some on his ear and on his heart. And then he covered him up with a white blanket. At that point, Old Man Badger began to sing some very old songs of thanks. And while he sang, the boy became drowsy and fell asleep. He fell into a very deep, deep sleep, so much so that he slept the rest of that entire day. And then he slept all night, soundly, with no dreams, or with no nightmares. And the next day he slept all the way through that day. And after the next night of sleeping through, why, his parents were getting very nervous, and they went to Old Man Badger, and they said, "Old Man Badger, you must do something. He's dying." And Old Man Badger said, "Your boy has heard the voice of the medicine, and the medicine is taking him on a very long, long journey. When he returns, he will have the answer to his question." Well, Old Man Badger said to be patient and wait, and he will come back. So the chief waited, and while he did so, the boy went off into a dream. And in his dream, he could see a narrow pathway before him. It was passing through dry, desolate desert with cactus and agave plants all about him, so thick that there was no room for him to leave the trail without injuring himself. And there was a sign, a wooden sign with the words engraved on it, "Skeleton House," with an arrow pointing to the west. And he followed that sign. Walked along that trail, careful not to scratch himself with the prickly cactuses along the way, until he finally got to the edge of a great precipice. It overlooked a magnificent canyon. And down below, billowing, dark mists of smoke. There, Off to his right was a great chief who was overlooking the canyon. The chief had a white ring around his eyes and large elk antlers growing from his head. And the large chief turned his rack of antlers around and looked at the boy, and he said, "Boy, why have you come here?" And the boy said, "I have come to find my grandparents. Do you know where they are?" And the great chief said, "That is good." And he pointed across the canyon. "Carry on through the dark smoke, and you will reach Skeleton House. That's where your grandparents live. They have passed by this way once before." "Thank you," the boy said, and then he looked over the ledge, and he was overcome with fear. How could he get down, he thought. Then the chief stood up, and he said, "I see that you are afraid. Let me help you." And he took the blanket off his shoulders, and he laid it down on the ground, and said, "Lie down on the blanket." The boy laid down, and then the great chief took up the four corners of the blanket, and then he flung him off the cliff. And the boy, as he was flung off the cliff, was terrified, as you can imagine. The blanket outstretched its edges like the wings of a great bird and started to glide down ever so gently until it spiraled down and landed upon the earth safely. The boy got up and he looked up at the high bluff and he said, "A miracle. I am definitely not in the land of the living." And he turned and he could see the trail before him, and he began to walk and follow that trail. And as he did so, there were many dark ghosts going in front of him and in back of him. He was terrified because he could feel their miserable and fearful hearts. And they were pleading for him to follow him, and he was about to do so until out from the mists of darkness before him emerged a white skeleton. It was a woman. "Who are you?" he said. "I have not done anything. I have come in peace. I am here to help you. My name is Skeleton Woman. You must not follow the ghosts." "Who are they?" he says. "They were once mortal men, but they did not learn to think spiritual thoughts. They did not exercise their ability to see beauty with their spiritual eyes and hear great songs with their spiritual ears. They did not share their love, and they did not ever give thanks. And now, as they shed their bodies on earth and have died, they come here blind, and they are deaf. They cannot experience the goodness in the afterlife. And they're so encumbered with fears and distorted thoughts that they live in misery. It's not good for you to follow them. Carry on along this path, and you will reach your skeleton house and find your grandparents." So the boy carried on, and he was careful not to inhale any of those terrible thoughts coming from those mists of darkness that was encircling him. And when he continued forward, he ever so often became tempted, but he would not. He stayed true to that path until finally he emerged out of those mists. And as he came out, he saw some young children playing in front of a magnificent stone house. Ah! The children were excited to see someone come from the mists of darkness. Someone has come, they said. Someone has made it through. And they almost instantly, a whole throng of skeletons was about him, all staring at him with their empty, bony eye sockets and their bony rib cages. One of them spoke with his jaw. "Who are you, and where have you come from?" "I am come from Shangapovi. I'm the son of the chief there, and I've come here to look for my grandparents." "Ah, you are from the Bear Clan," he said, pointed to some of the Bear Clan members and said, "These are your ancestors. Follow them and they will take you to your grandparents' home." And so the boy followed his ancestors to this house of his grandparents. It was a great adobe house covered with mud and stone, and a ladder went on up to the very top where the roof was. That was where the doorway entrance was to the house. The ladder was made of a flimsy sunflower stalk. It didn't look like it would support much, but when the boy saw the skeletons going up and down the ladder, he figured he could as well, so he started ascending. But as soon as he stepped on it, the rungs snapped in half. The skeleton said, Wait, don't go up anymore. Stay there, and we will bring your grandparents to you." So the boy waited patiently, and when his grandparents arrived, they brought him many melons and many fruits for him to feast upon. He was hungry, and with their blessing, he began to eat. It was very strange, because while he ate, he noticed they were chuckling and laughing and did not eat with him. "So what are you laughing at?" he said. "Oh, we don't eat earthly foods. We, and that's why we're so light and can just go up and down the ladder." "If you don't eat food, what do you eat then?" he said. "Well, we eat the food's fragrances and their sweet smells. And we also eat upon the good thoughts of the souls of people." "Tell me more," he said. "I was dressed like this and given medicine by the old man Badger, so I could learn about the dead and how they live." "We have much to teach you." And his grandparents sat down and began to share with them their story. He told them how they got there. And they said, "We live here now in darkness. We are completely surrounded by the mist of hate, the mist of sorrow and fear. And that is why we're starving. And here, the boy could see that they were desperate and in need greatly. And so he said, "Well, what can I do to help?" You cannot stay here. You must return back to your land of Shangapovi, and you must teach the people about what you've learned here. You must teach them that we depend upon their prayers. We depend upon their thoughts for our own survival. And they depend upon us, for when we are healthy and strong, we're able to bring the rains for them to live on. You see, when you share your love and your thanks on earth toward your fellow man, and think about beauty and the many truths in the spirit worlds, and do not always spend time on material thoughts and gaining material knowledge for your own selfish gains, then we're able to take those spiritual ideas and feast upon them and are strong. And then we return the material thoughts to the world in the form of rain, in light and strength and protection, so that those material ideas can return to where they belong in the material world, where they can be utilized for your bodies to survive and be healthy, to fight off those terrible illnesses and diseases. You do not need to live in fear, but live in love and in thanks. And when you do, you will be blessed. And when the boy had heard and was taught all that was happening in this land of the dead, he was pleased, but knew that he must return back. And he knew that he could not wander any more around the cemetery in gloom and sorrow and fear, but he needed to instead return to his friends and to share his love and thanks with one another. So he quickly gave them a kiss and a hug, and he began his long journey home. He went down through the dark mists of smoke. He went and climbed upon his blanket, and a gentle breeze blew him up to the top of the bluff where the old great chief was. And the chief said, "You must hurry home. Your parents are worried, sick about you." And he ran as fast as he could down the narrow pathway till he came back to his house. And when he got there, he came inside where his body was stiff and cold, laying upon the sand. He climbed underneath the blanket and returned into his body. And then his fingers began to feel life again, and his toes started to wiggle. And then his eyes came open. His mother noticed. "He's alive," she said. "My son has come back." Old Man Badger helped the boy up so he could wash his ears off and his mouth and his heart. And then his father and Old Man Badger helped the boy stand. He was very weak and exhausted. They brought him to the table to give him some water to drink and some food to eat. And then they started asking questions. And the boy said, "I have learned the answer to my question. I know where the dead live, and I know that they depend upon us, and we depend upon them. We must turn our hearts to them, and they will turn our hearts to us. And he taught them how to make prayer sticks with feathers attached to them, to send their thoughts like feathers into the wind, to be carried up to their ancestors. And he taught them how to make sacrifices on the altars and burn them so that the smoke and their sweet scents and fragrances would be carried to their ancestors to feed upon. And very soon, as the people began to give thanks and to share their love with each other, the rain soon came, and the skeletons of Skeleton House returned to their state of health, and they took all the darkness that was encumbering them and they sent it back to the earth as rain. And the rain brought food, and they brought strength for their bodies to live. And the people prospered, and they were happy. And no longer did they walk around in fear of sicknesses and illnesses. They did not fear death. And they mingled with one another. And that is the story of the boy who journeyed to Skeleton House.